welcome. This is the Indie Authors World Book Club, and today I am absolutely delighted that we're getting to have a wonderful chat with one of our great authors, who is Margaret Cook. So welcome, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Kim.
We're going to be talking today about your book, Border Brothers. Here it is here. I absolutely loved it. It's not a book I would normally read, but I absolutely loved it. So we're going to talk a wee bit about that, which is your second novel. But before we get into talking about the book, would you mind even just sharing a little bit about yourself? So what do you do and how do you spend your time these days?
Right, very good. Well, I am retired, which is a wonderful time of life, actually. You will get to choose exactly what you do. I used to be a consultant haematologist, but towards the end of my career, after a sort of life-changing event, which perhaps we won't go into right now, but I suddenly started writing, and I did a lot of freelance journalism, and I wrote 2 books, and then the book writing went quiet for a bit because I didn't have a literary agent, and I really wanted to write fiction, and everybody warned me off. Everybody said it's so difficult, and you think you can do it because you read a lot, but you can't. But I was determined to have a go. So I eventually started off with a bit on the side, which is fairly autobiographical, although I like to deny it. And then I went on to one which Border Brothers, which I've actually had on the back burner for a good number of years, probably 20 years even. But yet I thought it would be a very difficult novel to do as a first novel. I thought I should really kind of sort out my technique before I go ahead with this. So yes, it was published last year, and there was a big gap. But when I actually, got on with writing it, it didn't take me very much more than a year. But there was an awful lot of research that went into it long before that, over the years. And somehow you find yourself thinking about it. You think about your hero, and you think about the background, and then somehow things sort themselves out in the depths of your brain somewhere. And when you start writing, it all comes out. Where does that come from?
And that's because that's some of the stuff I definitely want to ask a wee bit more about, just around the kind of research and stuff. I mean, as maybe come back, you said it's been around in the back burner for you for a long time.
Yes.
What was it that really sparked your interest in this particular, historical tale that you've created?
Yes. Well, as you know, Kim, it's all about Sutra, which everybody knows, at least people in Edinburgh and people in the borders know as a moorland south of Edinburgh, where there's a heck of a lot of weather and it's windy and snowy, and it's where the road gets blocked off before anywhere else. And not all that many people know that there was this medieval hospital there for 3 centuries. And the reason they don't know about it, of course, is that there aren't any visible ruins there. But there is a chap, I should say, called Dr. Brian Moffat, who, for reasons I don't know, decided that he was going to explore Sutra Abbey, and he set up a scheme whereby he did the excavations and the archaeology. And this started about 30 years ago. And he wasn't ever very well funded, but he took it upon himself to talk to many groups of people. And he came to talk to us in Edinburgh, medical groups. And he is actually a very engaging speaker. He's got the gift of the gab. He can go on as long as he's got an audience. And I think everybody who hears him talk is very fascinated. I mean, the whole aspect of the medical activities in the medieval ages, of course, is utterly fascinating, what they actually could do, and people are always fascinated by that. But the thing which above all else caught my imagination was that this extremely famous, very prestigious, extremely well endowed and wealthy Abbey Hospital came to a very sudden end. And it was catastrophic. There was all sorts of scandal, and there was very, very little to account for it. There was a sort of story which didn't ring true about one of the masters being a naughty boy, and he had, you know, various sexual misdemeanors, and he was aggressive to people, and there was dilapidation of property. But, you know, heavens, this was nothing at all in the medieval clerical life, because a lot of them were very well connected and were just there for, you know, hedonistic reasons, you know, a job for life with an income that they could use themselves. So I felt this is a most inadequate reason, and tried to research it. And of
Yep.
course came against a brick wall, which Brian has himself said that he has done also. You know, it's almost as if there's a conspiracy of silence. So I thought, blimey, there is a story here. I didn't immediately think that it should be myself who wrote it. I used to know Ken Follett, and I suggested to him this would be a very good story, you know, after The Pillars of the Earth and that series of books. And he looked at me with a blank face. Why would I be interested in that? You know? So I thought, well, gosh, yes, okay. So that was really what sparked my interest in the story.
Yep.
And, you know, although I thought there's heaps here to write about, you know, the medical aspects,
Yep.
the political aspects, historical aspects, but the thing that really I wanted to try and find a reason for was the way it came to an end.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't it, I suppose, like you say, you know, when you think that you've found this interesting story, and you know, you very kindly, you know, shared that that potential book with another author, and kind of them just not getting it, you know, and that, I think that was really because it was really meant for you to write, Margaret, and that was that was it. It was your story to tell.
Yeah, it's very kind of you, Kim. But I think that it's a fairly local history. It's not widely known, and I'm sure that's why Ken was a bit disdainful about it. But yet, I have found that people are absolutely fascinated, just like I was. And you know, I've actually done meetings with Brian where he's talking about the actual history and I'm talking about my take, and you know, that also works extremely well.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really enjoying the whole process of marketing.
Good. Because I think one of the things when I came along, certainly when you launched your book,
Yes,
and was delighted to be part of that, you know, that event with you. See, and just hearing you talk about it then, and you know, and learn that a wee bit more about what went on behind the scenes. You know, I think it fascinated me, because I think there's so much of sort of Scottish history is not really been, you know, it hasn't been part of the main education curriculum. We've not really been taught about a lot of the stuff that went on, and so even just, you know, having shared some insights into some aspects of things, you know, was really kind of got me kind of, you know, this is really curious, this is interesting. I wished we'd been, you know, been kind of told a bit more about this when I was even in school, that got you interested to kind of go and explore some of these ideas. So I think maybe you're also potentially encouraging people to kind of look more at, you know, just Scottish history, you know, as well. So
well, yeah, I think it's endlessly fascinating. There have been some excellent authors, of course, who've done their research and their work, like Nigel Tranter, and you know, I think that you don't turn your nose up at reading fiction to get the background, because you know, his stuff is so detailed and so accurate. You can get an awful lot from that.
Yeah.
So, but I really enjoyed, you know, the research and reading up about it. And, you know, you were in some danger of going off, you know, there's just so much, you know, I lost myself in the National Library amongst the Augustinian pharmacopoeias and things like that. And it really was terrific. But, you know, the interesting thing for me looking back is that when I thought this is a mystery, I thought of it somehow as a whodunit. I thought it would be something terribly, terribly shocking. You know, there would be blood on the carpet or on flagstones, anyway, and there would be murders and all sorts of things going on. And yet, as you kind of worked your way through the history of the time, Scottish history, a very turbulent time, you know, the 1424, when it opens, really is the time of James I's return to Scotland from exile in England, and you know, there'd been anarchy in Scotland really, and warlords taking over and all this sort of thing. And you know, the more you read, the more you kind of get the feel of what was happening, and the more you realise that actually sutra, being so very well endowed and so very rich, James I returning to his country and having absolutely no money whatsoever, and owing a heck of a lot to England, well, you know, that would obviously concentrate the minds of quite a few people.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was obviously one thing that really stood out, if you like.
And I think what you've managed to do, Margaret, is like I said to you, I don't read historical fiction. It's not really been an area of interest. But what I got from reading your books, and when I started reading it, it was connecting with the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much about, I wanted to know what happened to these people. You know, I wanted to know what their story was and how that. So, I think what you have created is a great way where you have shared some of these, the insights into what was actually happening and going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a dry, kind of like historical factual book. It's, it definitely is the novel. It's the following those characters and wanting to know, what happens to them. And I think that's really for me, the real beauty of what you've written.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear you say that, because, this is one thing you're warned against if you're writing historical fiction. You get interested in stuff that really happened. And you want to put it in somehow, but you have to put it in such a way that people don't feel they're getting a lecture and they haven't just picked up a textbook or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think you've done well around that. I know that when I came along to the kind of book launch, and you were talking about the blood that was found at Sutra, and obviously there's then kind of mention in the book as to, you would give you some insight as to potentially where that blood had come from. Yes. Yeah, and also the medicines that were used, and I think you're talking about your past life, I suppose. How much of that actually really were you able to kind of bring your own experiences of kind of working in the health service and your your professional background? Was there a kind of continuation and some of your current experience kind of put into that too?
There was certainly a definite connection. The story quite early on in the book, where Fergus comes as a wounded squire to Sutra, and the infirmary, Brother Peter, puts his mind to healing this wound that he has that won't heal. That did arise out of one of my early experiences as a young houseman. I was working at the City Hospital at Edinburgh, and we had a consultant, Andrew Douglas, who a lot of people may remember. He was an amazing man, and he never took no for an answer. And he had this patient who, like Fergus, had a chest wound. But this was a wound that had been occasioned by surgery. But it just didn't heal. And the surgeons would have nothing to do with him. They said, if it's draining, it will heal eventually. Just have to wait. But Andrew had other ideas, Andrew Douglas. And so he brought this unfortunate man in, and he helped us to devise a way of inserting a tube and washing out the wound, until one amazing morning we found that little fragments of swab were getting washed out. So this was carefully kept and used as proof to the surgeons that they had actually left a pack behind inside this wound, you see. So he was then accepted. The surgeons said, "Oh, right, put the hands up, we were at fault," and rectified what, the damage that they'd done. So that was really the basis of the story about Fergus and his chest wound, which had some of his clothing carried in on the end of the spear.
So there you go. I suppose that's
it might well have happened.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. When I talk to quite a lot of writers, and there's a lot of us, I suppose, their own experiences and stories will find their way into books, and their characters as well. Because that's what we do, don't we? We absorb all the things that are going on around us, and good writers then use that experience to kind of help shape something that's then I suppose quite real for a reader to read, and kind of so you've sharing that own experience was was interesting. So I love your characters, as I've said, and Fergus McBeast, certainly your main man in here. Did he exist in real life then? Was he? No.
He was a totally fictional character. But his family did exist, the Macbeaths. They were a very, very well-known medical family. And originally they came from Ireland before the time of the Lords of the Isles or MacDonalds. But there was a princess, an Irish princess who belonged to the family, who came over and married very prestigiously. But thereafter, excuse me, every Scottish doctor from Robert the Bruce onwards had a Macbeth as his own personal doctor.
Right.
And they were extremely well educated. They'd gone to universities across Europe. They shared their knowledge. But they all seemed to have, at least according to legend, this amazing capacity to cure the sick.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
It's all right. I'll let you get a wee drink. I know. It's that way when you start. Sometimes when you start talking and you're doing something like this, it tickles the throat.
Yeah.
So the other characters, certainly the brothers from the Abbey, for example, and again there were some real strong characters developed, through your book from there. Where did your inspiration come from, to kind of create these supporting roles?
Where did the
the sort of inspiration behind the kind of supporting roles of your characters? Where did you find that from?
Well, they just grew. I didn't really have a model or anything like that. I just thought, what would such a person be like? The infirmera, Peter, he's certainly one of my favourite characters. And I thought, somebody who has that particular role, he's more like a nurse than a doctor. I mean, they didn't have this distinction in those days, but he had all the gentleness and the benevolence of a nurse.
Yeah.
And he just grew as I wrote about him. And then the very strong connection with Fergus, that grew as well. And I think I could use that to good effect, when Fergus falls in love and is completely discombobulated and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And Father John, actually, I think that subconsciously I did model him on my late ex-father-in-law, who was an academic. And, I didn't mean to do that, but I just realized as he was growing that he had an awful lot of characteristics that I recognized in my father.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing for me. You've got this, like you said, you've got the romance that comes in, to the book, and women are also depicted in the book. You've got strong female characters in there as well. That kind of strong female essence to the book.
Yeah.
And was that deliberate? In terms of adding the romance side, was this an intention to try and encourage women to read the book, or was it just that you felt that it would be a useful way to kind of show the different characteristics and the way that Fergus's life kind of took?
I don't think I even thought it out as carefully as that. I did have in mind that Fergus, who was a pretty saintly character, although not without his flaws, because he'd had all sorts of experiences when he was a student. But I did have a notion that he, having dedicated his life to his medical work and being very, very committed, he would suddenly, without any intention at all, fall in love. And this would perhaps contribute to the final events. So I wasn't really sure if he would have an affair with Jan at first, or he had a very strong connection with her, and there was a lot of chemistry between them.
Yeah.
But then it seemed, I wanted issue from this liaison. So I thought it would be better to have the the younger Annie.
Yeah.
But yes, there are quite a number of quite strong characters, and that actually wasn't intentional. In fact, somebody, I think it was my editor, said to me, would there really have been quite so many strong female characters about in the Middle Ages? Well, I mean, I don't think women have actually altered radically since the Middle Ages. I think they would have had difficulties manifesting their strength. But, you know, in certain corners, in little niches, that strength would come out. I mean, even Katrina, who was a bit of a flibberty-gibbet and not a very serious person at all, I mean, even she had her own strength, which was, you know, frankly, her glamour, which ensnared an awful
Yep.
lot of women. So she used that to great effect. But I got very fond of Mary as well. I thought,
Yeah.
I liked the connection she had with Fergus. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there were strong women about. They just had to make sure their strength wasn't too overstated.
Mm. Yep.
And when Mary has a long chat with the Earl of Douglas, you know, I had to make it that she didn't really seem too overbearing. You know, she had
Yes.
to knuckle down and, you know, be a little bit subservient, as it were.
Yep, yep. And I think that's balance came across. I think that you know, you managed to capture, for me certainly, a lot of interesting, you know, like aspects to their personalities, and I could see how that kind of, you know, we'll create all these things behind the scenes and let the men think that you know, they're moving things forward, which I suppose, to be honest, most of us still do.
Indeed, we do. That's right.
Another, I suppose, thread that was interesting for me was the, you know, the role that the midwives, you know, played, and, you know, how they were held in both kind of high regard, I suppose, within their communities, but also feared. You know, by the, you know, what were they up to, and the you know, the kind of, you know, were they witches, whatever else was going on, you know, and that was a really interesting factor, I thought, that, you know, the way that you kind of brought that into the book, you know, so.
Yes, the business about you know, women being servants in these big houses and being used, you know, as sexual partners and so on, against their will. I certainly read about that in medieval England in particular, and you know, often in monasteries they had comfort women. And so, you know, the progeny that were produced were of very mixed parentage, you know, the socially high and the socially low. And I couldn't believe it didn't happen in Scotland. So, you know, that was kind of made up. But the whole business of childbirth and obstetrics is a very fascinating one, because, you know, there are no records whatsoever left behind. As you would expect, the women were illiterate, the country women that you mentioned, so they couldn't keep records. And the men who were doing it, like the brothers at Sutra, they're obviously doing something. I don't know if I got it right in my account of it. But they were obviously dabbling in obstetrics in some way, and this was absolutely forbidden by the church of the time. You know, the Vatican apparently sent out notice after notice to all monasteries, this is something you will not do. I mean, the church was actually very uneasy with priests being doctors at all, but but the obstetric side of things, they really must not dabble in. So they were really putting themselves in harm's way in terms of accusations of heresy. By dabbling in this, and obviously for that reason, the men, although they were literate, they weren't leaving any records behind either. So although from, you know, country literature and books that have been written about herbals, and in fact in the Augustinian pharmacopoeia, there are mention of herbs and plants that were used, yet I had no idea whatsoever about how they were used. And so that I just had to make up. And I thought, my goodness, I'm going to meet some of my obstetric friends and they're going to say, what a load of rubbish. How can you do that? But actually one of them very kindly said, I thought you managed it pretty well, actually. So he obviously thought it was credible, at any rate.
Yeah, and I suppose that's like you said, the thing when you don't know, when you can't find any
Mm.
real facts of how things were doing, then you're making the,
Mm.
that kind of, you're using kind of literary license as well, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, what you were creating was a novel and a story to entertain and engage people with. So, but I can see that you wanted to have enough background, and it could have been, sort of these things could be held in truth almost at that particular time.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. But as long as you're steeped in the background, you can work out what should have filled this particular hole in history.
Yeah.
And there was one that I very much enjoyed writing about, and that was the arrival of King James back in Scotland. Mm-hmm. Because the record has it that he stopped off at Durham and he met a lot of the Scottish nobles there. And then he went on to Melrose, and then he went on to eventually Scone. But there was no mention of a sutra, absolutely none. And yet if he had come up that royal road, he would never ever have bypassed sutra. Mm-hmm. So that's why I wrote it in. And at least two people said to me, where did you find that? I couldn't find anything about that. How interesting. Where did you dig that up? And I said, well, I just imagined it.
So here you are now, Margaret. You're rewriting history for people as well. They're going to go, oh, this is supposed to be fact. And I think that there was also a lot of brutality.
Yes.
At that time, and that's the thing. I wondered, did you find writing, some of the kind of, to try and show how brutal some of the situations were, and how the people were towards each other, was that a difficult thing to write, or?
No, I didn't find that terribly difficult. Maybe I'm quite stoical about these things. I mean, the person obviously you're referring to is, well, before all others, is Colin Douglas.
Yes.
Yes, he. I didn't know I was going to restore him back to life, actually, having killed him off quite early on in Backlot. And suddenly I thought, that would be interesting if he wasn't really killed at all. So I quite enjoyed bringing him back to life. But, if you read history, you know about the brutality that went on. Mm-hmm. And in particular, the brutality that was associated with the accusations of heresy. Mm. More extreme than any other. And all done under the mantle of the church.
Yeah.
The reason why people were burned at the stake was that the church had, a horror of shedding blood. It felt that this was terribly sinful to shed blood. So that's why they burnt people at the stake, or drowned them, of course. Mm-hmm. So, the sort of mind that can think it's sinful to shed blood, but we're allowed to do this is almost beyond comprehension, really.
Yeah. But I think you've done a great job at because when I first, I started to read the book, and you got into that whole description of what was happening, that, the burning of this, and it's like, oh, your heart's in your mouth as to what's going to happen, and then it's like, is this really going to happen? What's going to go on, and not sure of where you were going to take the story, and how. But I think, just, would encourage everybody to kind of just, have a read of this book, because you're going to love it, and there'll be some twists that you didn't expect. Did you have a favourite character? And that you wrote about?
Well, I think Fergus was my favourite. Somebody said to me quite early on when I first thought about writing the book before I shelved it, this character, people have to absolutely fall in love with him. They have to really, want to know what happens to him. In fact, my editor took me to task for not going into greater detail about the love affair. She really wanted to know about it. Whereas I felt quite strongly that it should be something left to people's imagination. Mm-hmm. And I felt, for me, what went on that was not written was something extremely profound and passionate. And I didn't really know that I wanted to actually put it into words. And in fact, the love affair was even more understated in my original version, but my editor encouraged me to go back and write a wee bit more about it. So
Yeah,
But
well, I think you had a good balance then, because there was enough to understand that
yeah,
there was a real passion there. So that was, that was great. One of my favourite characters in the book is Callum,
yes, yes,
and this wonderful man who undertook this great challenge of his kind of pilgrimage and then coming back, and the whole how he's so loyal and kind and very intelligent, but
yeah,
come from quite humble, humble
yes,
kind of background. Um,
absolutely.
and I just loved the fact that he dips in and out of the story.
Oh,
Just, yeah, I
yes,
think that
yes.
was, it was lovely how so the whole kind of pilgrimage stuff was that something that you had kind of just researched, or you were just aware of, and just that
Yeah,
you
I
chose
was aware of it. We had gone on a holiday. I went to Santiago de Compostela. We didn't actually do the pilgrimage, but
yeah,
we hired a car and motored along the pilgrim route in a retrograde way. So that was way back in the 90s, and I suppose that sparked my interest. And the story of the scallop shells and their place in the cathedral at Santiago, where they all finished up. So it is quite an amazing business, and the toughness with which people took up these challenges, because pilgrimage was a great thing in the Middle Ages, and how people found themselves there. I mean, poor old Callum, he didn't have any maps. He just had
yeah,
to figure out how he got there. It was just trying to think
yeah,
how he could go about doing this,
yeah.
and
And I
yet.
think that what it brought for me is he was the light, if you like. I thought his character brought some all round goodness. That was how I would describe him. He was just this shining light of kind of this, very noble, but not of noble descent. Because some of the people of noble descent, and some of the kind of the more aristocracy, if you like, to put it, were not of the characters that you would actually want to identify with. And here was this
Absolutely
young
right.
man that had just kind of shone for me through the story.
Yes, I hadn't really thought of that, but yes, I suppose he was probably the the most saintly character of all. Were you very devastated then when I killed him off?
Yes, spoiler alert for everybody.
Go on,
I was hoping, yes, yeah, but yeah, I was hoping there was perhaps another story coming with him, so I must admit when I got, oh no.
oh dear,
um,
yes, might need to edit that bit out. But yes, as I said, you don't really know what's going to happen to your characters. And I won't say any more for fear of letting it out of the bag. But I had no idea until it seemed to me that there was certain inevitability about certain things happening.
yeah,
And then, you allow them to happen.
yeah. And that's often a conversation I've had about some writers who meticulously plan out, all the strands of things, and they have, that this is exactly how they're going to get here and what's going to happen.
Mm.
And others who, as they write the scenes and the story almost kind of starts to tell itself.
Yes, very much so.
And would you find yourself more in the latter,
Yes, very much so. I have obviously been aware of this two-stranded way of writing fiction, and I know that publishers do like to know exactly what's going to happen in every chapter and how things are going to pan out. But we I don't think our minds really work like that, at least not at their best. I think our minds, the way we've evolved, they work best if they just let things come out. I heard Alexander McCall Smith talking about how he wrote his books in the days when he was writing the series for the Scotsman.
yeah,
And he said, I have a piece which is due in a few days, and I haven't written it yet, and I have no idea what's going to happen. And he kind of sits down and goes into a bit of a dwam. I don't know if it's
yeah,
aided by tea or any other magic substance or anything like that at all. No idea of it. But the characters just pop up and say, right, here I am, and
yeah,
this is what I'm going to do. And he just follows them, trips along behind, recording what happens. And I think this is a far more genuine and good way of writing rather than planning.
Yeah.
It may well be that perhaps, I don't know, Sinclair might say something about this, because if you're going to write a whodunit, you probably have to plan very carefully, do you know?
Well, he doesn't either. I mean, that's what he's said before, that sometimes he's had a notion of, how things are going to go, but as he's writing towards the end, sometimes that just completely flips round, and he starts, so he's not that meticulous in the kind of planning stage either. He's a bit of a pantser, as we would call, that kind of just run by the seat of your pants and create the story as it goes.
The only trouble, of course, with that route, and I found this writing Border Brothers, that you write far too much. And when I first submitted the book to the editor, I got 108,000 words, and she said, you're going to have to cut an awful lot of that. So there were things that I could go back, and I realized they didn't actually contribute to the story. It was a bit sad, though, chopping them out. Then you've got to be very careful about continuity.
Yeah, and that's the power, I suppose, of working with an editor, because it's so difficult, I think, to keep track of everything yourself, isn't it? About what you've written, just even once it's almost. I know when I'm writing anything, once it's out, it's kind of gone. So my brain doesn't hold on to it anymore. So thank goodness for an editor who can say, "Oh, wait a minute, you said this time. That has to be, it has to continue." So yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So what's next for you then, Margaret? I mean, have you got another book on the go just now, or?
Well, I've got the research for another book. I mean, I've had really quite a lot of positive feedback on Border Brothers. And in some ways, with the fall of Sutra, you might think it's terribly final. What can you write about as a sequel to that? But I am actually trying to put together a sequel.
Ah, okay.
Some of the characters, but obviously not all. And it will take the history of the church in Scotland forward a bit, although I don't think I'm going to go quite as far forward as the Reformation.
Okay.
But I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag, but there are all sorts of fascinating things going on in the area not too far from Sutra, in Midlothian, in 15th century Scotland. And that's going to form all part of the tale. But, the history around the time researching is producing some really fascinating characters. And I thought, right, this is somebody I've really got to chase up, find as much out about him as possible.
Yeah.
But yes, I will hopefully restore some of the. I'm not going to bring anyone back to life, but I will restore some of the characters that went into the swirling mist at the end of Border Brothers.
Ah, good. Well, we'll look forward to that. Certainly, that will be really interesting. I suppose so. If anybody wants to get in touch with you or to kind of check out you more, obviously we're encouraging you to kind of go and read the book, share it with your book club. Because this is really part of the reason why we're doing these interviews, is that these books are maybe a bit of hidden gems. Having being an independent author, this kind of choosing to self-publish means there's a lot of work goes on to try and market and get your book out there yourself. We're just, as I said, we're encouraging people to connect through with us on this. Share it out with your book club. I'm sure that your book club will love it. And if people want to come back and connect with you and find out a wee bit more, you have a website, Margaret, don't you?
I do, yes.
And do you know offhand? Well, we can put a wee note up anyway about what the web address is. So when we put this out, it'll be there. But is it just?
It's margaretcook.co.uk.
Cool. So there we are. If people to connect through with you there. And the other thing, I suppose, I would encourage anybody, if you go and read the book, is leave a review. because it's one of those things that you know, when you're writers, you know, love them or hate them in terms of reviews, but we all need them, and they're often the proof. When someone else comes along and they find a book, they'll be swayed a little if there's at least some reviews there to encourage people to read it. So that would be really cool and very kind of you if you read the book, that you actually go off and leave a review for Margaret. So is there anything else that you want to add before we kind of wrap this up? Or,
I think that's probably enough meat to put before potential readers. Hopefully it will spark interest in some.
Yeah. So can I say thank you so much, Margaret. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about Border Brothers. And you know, I hope that you've enjoyed the wee chat that we've had too. It's been interesting to hear some of the things that have gone on behind the book.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've enjoyed it very much. I think every author loves writing about her book or his book. Sorry, speaking about her book.
Yeah, yeah.
Chatting away. It's great fun.
So thank you very much. And please do check out the book and let us know what you think.